All right, joining me after a while. It's actually been a while since we've had you on, Kristy Perano. Wow, you can tell how long it's been because I got your name wrong. Yeah, so since you were last on the air, a lot has happened. But the main thing has been the outbreak of war in Israel. And for those of you who don't know, we've done 2 videos on this already, or 3 videos on this already. But Hamas on October 7th, 2023, this year, Hamas launched an attack on Israeli communities around the Gaza Strip, and the attack resulted in the single greatest loss of life for Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. That is how the casualties, I think, numbered like 900, like, or so, or in the hundreds. So it's the single worst attack on the Jewish community since the Holocaust. So just to put that in perspective, Israel has since retaliated with airstrikes. They've for a while they've cut off aid to Gaza because of the fact that it was all going towards Hamas and not towards the Palestinian people. And now a ground invasion has begun. And so the situation has been moving quickly over the past 3 days. But Kristy, I want to know if you get you to jump in to get your take on all of it.
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of people, I mean, I was, genuinely shocked by the Hamas attack. I mean, I was thinking about it, and it's the only time I can think of that a non-nuclear power claiming to be a government attacked a nuclear power, and especially without provocation. But I mean, there've been a lot of wars, but I think it's pretty much always been either, non-nuclear to non-nuclear, or a nuclear power invading a non-nuclear power. So it was unique, and well, I mean, it was uniquely tragic, and it was it was a terrorist attack. I mean, the way it was done was like targeting, torturing, murdering civilians. It was not done as, like, according to any sort of convention of warfare if you like decided to invade a country. And I think also just like I don't know, I guess I'll say the stupidity of, like, we know that Israel is a significant military power, and when you are a terrorist group claiming to be a government sitting next to a huge military power, like, just doing an unprovoked attack when they've kind of looked the other way for a while on some other indiscretions, just seems also uniquely stupid. In terms of, like, it's like, what were they thinking? Like, I guess Hamas's hope is, I mean, either they're just not being logical at all, they're just like, oh, we killed some Jews, so good for us. Or they're thinking that Israel is going to be under so much pressure not to destroy them that they'll be talked out of, like, doing what pretty much any sovereign country would do, and that would be to retaliate. I think though that there is.
Can I just say really quickly, there is an alternate scenario in which Bernie Sanders is elected president of the United States, Jeremy Corbyn is elected prime minister of the UK, and that sort of thing does happen.
It was actually a Bernie Sanders tweet where I think he wrote I don't remember exactly what the original tweet was. Oh, it was about the synagogue massacre from a year ago or something, and said that, we mourn the loss of this. And then a bunch of people were like, read the room, like, why aren't you defending Palestine? And basically criticizing him for commemorating a time where on US soil, a synagogue was targeted, and saying that, he shouldn't be doing that. So that was a pretty shocking anti-Semitism.
Yeah. What's even worse than that is, I think you're referring to the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
That synagogue is in the district of one of the squad members who voted against a resolution to condemn Hamas and one to support Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's been, I've kind of like, and on Twitter, I've seen, or I guess formerly Twitter, now X, there have been a lot of, like, kind of left-leaning people. I think, I mean, a lot of them are Jewish, and not necessarily all of them, though, that have said that they've been surprised by the the sentiments of other left-wingers. I guess for me, I'm not really surprised. The only thing that surprises me is how, like, bold people have been about it. But the fact that so many people, like really on both sides of the political aisle, have these views does not surprise me. But I think the thing is that the left has been focused on the neo-Nazis on the right and kind of in denial about the issues, in their own fold. But I mean, like when I was in college, it was cool to promote this like boycott, divest, sanction Israel, and it was just cool to be anti-Israel. And like you do, obviously we have to distinguish between disagreeing with the government and and animosity towards all of the people that that government represents. And I mean, even like Afghans, it's like, I mean, I have a lot of Afghan people that I work with that I help, and that doesn't mean that I'm sympathetic to the Taliban, which is their de facto government. So like obviously someone could say I disagree with what Israel is doing without being against Jews, but there is so much of the like anti-Israel sentiment which is just like thinly veiled actually anti-Semitism, because they're not even trying to say that, okay, Israel has a right to defend themselves. I disagree with this particular thing they did. There's some of that, but the vast majority is just like they're all occupiers, they all deserved it, and this kind of like blatant,
Yeah.
anti-Semitism and a failure to condemn it by, I mean, a lot of people on the far left and probably also the far right that don't actually disagree all that much, if at all.
It's it's worth noting, I should point out, by the way, that a lot of these squad members of Congress, particularly Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Jamal Bowman, Ayanna Pressley, Summer Lee in particular, a lot of these squad members of Congress actually have significant Jewish populations in their districts who might be pretty pissed off by the votes that they're taking. I in Summer Lee in particular, she just recently visited a synagogue on Friday because it was the 5th anniversary of the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre. But in the 3 weeks leading up to it, she didn't even talk to her Jewish constituents. Like, she just avoided them altogether. That's the sort of thing we're talking about, is these people who are and we talked about Rashida Tlaib and like the lie that she was spreading about Israel bombing a hospital. We now know that a Hamas own rocket hit that hospital, but she was still spreading that lie. And just that very next weekend, a woman in Michigan who was the synagogue president was murdered. And so we need to remember that lies like this have consequences. Like there was a attack on synagogues in both Berlin and in Tunisia, and also there was just news today that there was a plane coming in from Tel Aviv landing in Dagestan in Russia, and a mob swarmed the tarmac where the plane was landing.
Yeah, and that's the kind of, or at least one commentator was saying that that's the kind of thing that doesn't happen without some like passivity or maybe buy-in from the authorities. Like if they, when the airport was overwhelmed, why didn't they send, the equivalent of a SWAT team or something and be like, no, you guys are getting out of the airport. You're not disrupting the civil order. Of course, I'm sure Russia is going to claim that, they were just overwhelmed or whatever, but like 2 hours later, they still hadn't done anything about it, and just planes that can't open their doors, like stuck on the tarmac because of this angry mob outside. So just the kind of like chaos that you wouldn't expect. And I mean, I know mobs can overwhelm security, but also it also gives one the impression that Russia is probably not really trying. They're probably not trying that hard to deal with the situation, because if hours later they still haven't done anything to get it under control, it's not that much of a priority to control it.
And it kind of calls into question Netanyahu's whole strategy of trying to appease the Russians. He does it because there is a Jewish community in Moscow that he's worried about. But, just at the beginning of the conflict, Putin was basically saying, yeah, this conflict's Israel's fault. And still he doubled down. He didn't allow Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He wanted to visit Israel as a show of solidarity, but Netanyahu would not let him visit. So I sometimes question that strategy that Netanyahu has, particularly with regard to courting countries like Russia and also Turkey, whose President Erdogan has also said some very horrible statements about Israel in recent years. But they still work
Yeah.
with, or recent days, but they still work with Turkey in order to operate in Azeri airspace.
Yeah, Turkey has like just been like, oh yeah, Hamas is not even a terrorist group, and like giving like jihadi speeches and like throwing the entire West under the bus. So Turkey is really just like showing their true colors also, and their in their rhetoric lately, just like defending Hamas. And I think it is fair to be concerned about the cost of war. And also, I mean, I'm not of the opinion that either the US or Israel can do no wrong. So I mean, there probably will be war crimes committed by Israeli soldiers, because and I think there are war crimes sometimes committed by US soldiers, but I think the difference is that the leadership is not sanctioning it. I don't think the US sends soldiers into an area and says, okay, pillage, torture, murder people. And I don't think Israel is going to be like intentionally trying to cause civilian casualties, but there will be civilian casualties in any war situation. And I think it is legitimate to be concerned about that. It's legitimate to be, saddened by that. And I've seen I think Justin Amash is a former congressman and no longer in yeah, I'm quite sure he's no longer in Congress, but he had been he's a very libertarian leaning, had been very conservative Republican, and he is from Palestine, but from a Christian family, and he has posted some stuff about, I think a couple of his cousins were killed in a airstrike, and like concern for his family. And obviously, I think his family is like legitimately, to any of his family members that are lost are innocent victims. And I don't think his family is likely to be supporting Hamas. So I think we can recognize that and be saddened by that, be concerned about that. And I don't think it's offensive if someone says, I disagree with this particular thing Israel did, any more than it's, I'm not offended by someone saying, I don't think this thing the US did was justified. But I think the difference is when it's just like, oh, the when it's motivated by, anti-Semitism, when it's motivated by the idea that Israel should not exist, or that Israel does not have a right to defend themselves. And that's why I think a lot of the criticism is coming from, is not like a genuine conversation about, how can Israel defend themselves and minimize the loss of life. It's just like Israel shouldn't be defending themselves. Israel shouldn't even exist. And there's also plenty of like people that are far more concerned about the impacts of on Palestinians than they are any time that an Islamic nation is the aggressor. So it's like Iran can cause hundreds of thousands of people to die or be killed in Yemen, and if Saudi Arabia doesn't bat an eye, and then Israel wants to defend themselves from a coordinated like mass terrorist attack, and then they're like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Like, well, you have a double standard here, because if you had nothing to say when when this Islamist country is messing up, and then you're all of a sudden very critical of Israel, then it's kind of a double standard. And I mean, you see that all the time with like Turkey and Pakistan. I mean, a classic example was when Erdogan said he was very saddened by George Floyd being killed. And it's like, I mean, that was tragic. I mean, I think the guy may have had some substances in his body at the time, but I mean, George Floyd had some issues. He had kind of turned his life around. He seemed to be doing better. And regardless of the exact circumstances of, whether he died of cardiac arrest because he had something in his body when he was stressed, or whether he was, or, I know that there's also the claim that he was choked by the police. So, I am not an expert on what happened there, but like my view of that is that it's tragic. It appears that he died at least in part because of excessive use of force by police. And I think that was tragic. But when Turkey is like, oh, this is so terrible. Like, police killed someone in America. It's like they have thousands of people every year killed by police, and Pakistan disappears thousands of people extrajudicially by police. So it's like if I don't feel it's not okay that if we have people being killed by police in America that didn't need to die, I don't think that's okay. And I don't think it's an excuse to say, oh, well, it's maybe a handful a year in the US instead of thousands a year in Turkey or Pakistan, but it's still quite a lot of hypocrisy when it's like maybe it's a few dozen a year that happens with in the US, and then compared to a few thousand a year in Turkey or Pakistan, and then Turkey or Pakistan are like, oh, we're really saddened by this. It's like, no, you're just found an opportunity to criticize the US for something that they should be criticized for, but that has like way less of a problem than what you're turning a blind eye to. It's kind of, there is a Bible verse that I'm not sure if it's in maybe it's in the Old Testament, so maybe you're familiar with it, that says you should get the log out of your own eye before you worry about the speck in someone else's eye. And there's quite a bit of that that's going on with these Islamist
Right.
countries, being like, oh, here's a human rights problem in Israel or the US. Um, it was, I don't know if you saw, there was something on Twitter recently that there was a group that was like queers for Palestine, and recently the Palestinians are like, by the way, you guys aren't welcome here at all. It was just,
Yeah. By the way, I just wanted to say something, about because about Israel, Israel's response, and how unfortunately, inevitably, Palestinian civilians are going to get caught up in that. And the reason for that is that Hamas wants that to happen. They
yeah.
deliberately operate in densely populated areas like Gaza City. They station their offices, their military offices are like in apartment buildings. They station their rockets in people's homes, in hospitals, and in schools. They know that Israel's is going to have to target their military infrastructure, so they put their military infrastructure as close as possible to Palestinian civilians, so they get caught up in it. It's people. I think people like Hillel Fold have or Hill Newer have pointed out that like this is like a double war crime. They're stationing their rockets among Palestinian civilians in order to target Israeli civilians. So it's a double war crime, but it does mean Iron Dome's going to shoot down a lot of this stuff, but Israel's response is going to end up hitting Palestinian civilians because Hamas wants that to happen.
Right, yeah, and that's an important point. I mean, anytime there is war, there will be some civilian casualties, but Hamas is deliberately making it so that the civilian casualties are as high as possible. Plus, they're claiming today like 8 or 9 thousand, Israeli airstrikes have killed 8 or 9 thousand people, but I mean, we have no way of knowing if those could be wildly inflated beyond the, I mean, beyond so it's like they've deliberately made it so that when Israel targets, their military infrastructure, they maximize civilian casualties, and they could be lying about how many casualties there are, beyond the ones that they increase. I mean, for example, whenever they've tried to shoot a rocket at Israel and it falls short, then they count that as the civilian casualty caused by Israel, and it's literally them shooting their own civilians because they went in and they made their rockets out of irrigation pipes. And it's like, well, if you use your irrigation pipes to build rockets and then some of the rockets don't hit Israel like they planned, they end up hitting themselves instead, and then they count that as part of Israel's death toll. So I mean, they're just, so yeah, Hamas is intentionally making it so that more civilians are killed, and then beyond that they're lying and exaggerating the numbers. Like, it's not clear that 500 people were killed in that hospital at all. Like they said 500 people were killed by an Israeli rocket, and it was actually, apparently it was their rocket, and it probably wasn't 500 people
Yeah,
anyway.
it probably struck a parking lot. Apparently, there was a munitions depot near that hospital. Like this is what I'm talking about. And you were mentioning like we've put in millions, if not billions, in aid to Gaza and to the Palestinians. And where's it all gone to? You I think I saw this video that of there was a UN agency that was claiming that orders breaking down because Palestinians are breaking into warehouses to steal grain. steal, because like in reality it's Hamas stealing the grain. So I'm actually encouraging Palestinians to do that. Break into these warehouses and get that stuff that was meant for you, not meant to be turned into weapons. This is the sort of thing that Hamas does.
Yeah, and I think Israel said, today or yesterday or something that like there's a multi-week food supply in Gaza. It's not clear that Hamas is sharing it with the civilian population, but like they were claiming within 2 days that they were like, completely out of humanitarian supplies, and some commentators are like, well, they still have plenty of rockets. So I mean, that was some pretty poor planning if you have like a multi-week supply of rockets and a 2-day supply of food. Um, but I mean, that maybe, but yeah, I mean, I think the data on estimates of how much of the humanitarian aid sent to Gaza has been spent, by Hamas on like rockets to shoot at Israel. It's just, I mean, I think it's probably almost impossible to know how much of that has been siphoned off, but I think the thought is a majority of what has been sent to Gaza, like to try to help them like build civilian infrastructure. They've just built rockets instead, and then they've ripped out civilian infrastructure like irrigation pipelines to build more rockets. So, so yeah, you can't deal with. I mean, I think this also just illustrates how having terrorists trying to run governments doesn't work very well. And I mean, it's the same thing the world has decided is okay for Afghanistan, is that let's just let the terrorists run the government. And it's like terrorists will be terrorists. Their ideology is such that their number one priority is murdering people that they deem infidels. And they can be especially motivated to kill Jews and Christians or governments that they think represent Jews and Christians. Um, so, I mean, you're not dealing with people that have any interest in protecting their civilian population. And then it's like, oh, look, the civilians are suffering. They need more aid. But it's like, that's not a priority for them. They really don't care. They don't care if their people are starving. They're more motivated. They're corrupt, and what actually ideologically motivates them is, if they're murdering Jews or whatever, then they're not going to prioritize feeding their people when they still want to build rockets to try to kill more Jews. So I feel like there's just a disconnect where sometimes we expect people to act rationally or to act in a way that would be consistent with, how we would imagine ourselves behaving if we were leading them. But if you're dealing with terrorists, their worldview and their priorities and their belief system are totally different. So if you believe the number one way to get points with God and make sure you're going to heaven is to, kill Jews, which, I mean, that's what some of these groups like Hamas do believe. I'm not saying that every Palestinian person believes that. I honestly don't know, what percentage of Palestinians truly support Hamas. But that is what their leaders and, that is what Hamas believes, and Hamas is the ones like controlling the purse strings and running the place. So, until Hamas is gotten rid of, then that's what the de facto government is going to do.
Well, I think you just answered my next question. I was about to put you on the spot, promote you to the rank of Major General, and ask you, do you think the goal this time needs to be the destruction and eradication of Hamas?
Yeah, because I don't think Hamas wants to coexist with Israel. I think they've made that pretty clear. So, I don't think anyone can fault Israel for saying that Hamas needs to go. I think the challenge that Israel's going to have with Gaza is, I mean, similar to what the US ran into with Iraq and Afghanistan, is that when you can have a really bad group calling the shots, but then when you get rid of them, if you don't have something to replace them with to maintain order, then governing becomes difficult. So I think Israel is completely justified in saying that Hamas is prioritizing murdering Jews over running their, country, or I guess maybe, well, it's not actually a country, but they're governing this area, the Gaza Strip. Hamas has prioritized killing Jews over governing Gaza, and I think Israel is justified to say Hamas has to go. I think the challenge is going to be that you'll create a power vacuum, and And yeah, like I said, I don't know what percentage of Palestinians actually are sympathetic to Hamas. I mean, you can have a terrorist group that takes over, and you could have the majority of the population not support them. But you're not. I mean, you can have a situation like Nazi Germany where you get rid of the Nazis, and then like the West was able to rebuild Germany and not have the population just like decide that they really still wanted the Nazis back. But I don't know, is that going to be like with Hamas is with Gaza? Could you get rid of Hamas and then have the population like northeast Syria? You have a significant Kurdish population, and they have set up some self-governing mechanisms. They have a more democratic and free society than when the Syrian regime was running it. So it kind of was like ISIS displaced the Syrian regime, and then the Kurds, with the support of the US, got rid of ISIS. And now you have this semi-autonomous region that has done a reasonable job of, trying to govern themselves and trying to be democratic. They have, I mean, more freedoms and more gender equality than most of the rest of the Middle East, because like the Kurdish groups value that, and they were able to try to set up a reasonably democratic society. But I'm not sure that you would get that if you get rid of Hamas and Gaza. I'm not sure that you have a population that is gonna be more like Northwest Syria, where they're gonna like they're gonna be supportive of setting up a more democratic government, or are they going to, or is there enough support for Islamism in Palestine that they're just gonna install a new Islamist government if you get rid of Hamas? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, there are narratives, of course, around Afghanistan that I disagree with, saying that, well, the Afghan government failed because the Afghan people wouldn't fight the Taliban, and that's a very unfair narrative, because like the Afghan government collapsed because we stopped providing logistical support to them. There were plenty of Afghans still willing to fight the Taliban, but I don't feel like the Afghan population in general was not as they're not as like they didn't do as good of a job of setting up and maintaining democratic institutions as the Kurdish regions did. But also, I mean, any narratives that, oh, the Afghans all actually support the Taliban, I mean, those are unfair. And so, and I haven't studied Palestine enough to know, like, is the people that, if you have right wingers that are like, oh, well, they're Muslims, of course they all support Hamas. That's not that may not be a fair narrative. It could be only a minority of them that really truly support Hamas, but also it could be the majority of them that support Hamas. I don't know, and I don't know how difficult it would be to try to set up a government that is not Hamas and is able to actually maintain order and govern and things like that.
Right. We're running out of time, so we got like about eight minutes left. So I want to zoom out from Gaza just a little bit, talk about a few things around the world. Like, I don't know if you're following the situation in Iraqi Kurdistan. It sounded like that was like the part of Kurdistan where there was actually a lot of promise for an autonomous, self-governing Kurdish state. But it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, that they're collapsing there.
Yeah, I haven't been following that as closely, the real recent events there. I did see that there was um yeah, there was some, I think Turkey displaced what they claimed were like a PKK, and then there was some infighting over who was gonna take over there. Iraqi Kurdistan has had long-standing issues with corruption. I know some Kurds that have been fairly critical of their governing party. There's also issues where like the Iraqi Kurds and the Syrian Kurds don't necessarily get along. So I think generally speaking, the Syrian Kurds have done a better job of like setting up their governing area in northern Syria. But yeah, I have seen some of that, and it's very unfortunate that it kind of has devolved into infighting amongst different Kurdish groups in parts of
You're
Iraqi
saying that
Kurdistan.
there's some hope for the Syrian Kurds now?
Well, I think that with the Syrian Kurds, I think nominally that's still part of Syria, but in practice, since ISIS was displaced from northern Syria, the Kurds have set up, I mean, Rojava, which is like a more or less autonomous part of Syria. The issue there is
Because I
that
was going to say it sounds like I thought that Turkey was attacking that part of Syria.
yes, and Turkey has recently bombed them again. There are still US troops embedded there. There is like fresh concerns that with Iranian proxies attacking US troops, it could put more pressure on the US to pull their troops out to avoid having US troops killed in northern Syria. I think the Syrian Kurds themselves have done a good job, like with US support, of governing and of fighting ISIS. But the issue is that they're stuck between Turkey aggression, including like bombing and drone attacks on leaders and things like that. And Turkey, for all their claiming to be upset about the claim that Israel shot a hospital, Turkey and Russia intentionally bomb hospitals in Syria, and no one really says anything. So yeah, there's issues there, but I feel like the issues are more outside incursion and not that like the Kurds in northern Syria can't get along themselves. The problem is Turkey wants to attack them and the regime wants to attack them. And the US has been a little bit hot and cold on supporting them because don't want they the US doesn't want to come down as hard on Turkey as they should. So they're kind of trying to appease Turkey. They also don't want the region to collapse and get taken over by ISIS. So yeah, the US is kind of like sort of tried to tell Turkey not to attack, but Turkey doesn't still bomb stuff. And then the US tells Turkey, we really don't like you to bomb stuff in Syria. And then Turkey stops for a while. So it's it is a very volatile situation. There are concerns both about the US just fully leaving the area because of pressure from Iranian militant groups. And there's also the concerns about the US like not deterring Turkey and just letting Turkey go in there and wreak even more havoc than they already
Right.
have.
I want to ask one more question specifically about Turkey because it sounds like after over a year of stalling, it sounds like Turkey's finally ready to admit Sweden to NATO. They admitted Finland earlier this year. Now it sounds like they're ready to admit Sweden. Any idea on how fast we're going to see moving on that? Because Hungary also has to agree to it too.
I'm not sure. I mean, I hope it will. Hopefully, it will move soon. And I hope that Sweden didn't have to like actually turn over Kurdish members of parliament like Turkey was threatening about. But
I,
um,
I don't think that would have even been legal in Sweden for them to do that.
well, I think they were claiming that she had like, I don't know, disturbed the peace or something in Turkey. Or, I mean, I think they were trying to get her on, they were trying to claim an extradition thing, but I think you're supposed to have actual, like, concrete evidence that someone committed a crime in your country to be able to get someone extradited there. You're not just supposed to be like, oh, I don't like this person. I don't like her ideas. We'd like to throw her in jail to shut her up. So please hand her over. I mean, they're not supposed to be able to do that, but
Right. For a country that's supposedly a NATO ally, they've been causing us a lot of trouble, both Israel and the West, I have to say.
yeah, I think that, and yeah, I think Turkey is really playing a double game. I mean, they've had ISIS fighters that have like gone in and out of their country, and then they're like, oh, we really need to tighten our borders, and then it's like they figure out how to keep all the Kurds out, but they can't figure out how to keep ISIS out. It's like they're definitely Turkey's definitely complacent and supporting a lot of these Islamist groups while also claiming that they're a NATO ally. So and then Turkey also claims that they lost all these lives like fighting ISIS, but it's actually the Kurds that did most, if not all of the ISIS fighting. I mean, Turkey claims to have been helping fight ISIS, but then also somehow mysteriously they would end up with ISIS guys just showing up in Turkey. So, and the time the US took out an ISIS commander like near the Turkey border, they didn't notify Turkey, probably for a reason because they didn't want him, disappearing if they told Turkey. So like I think the US knows that Turkey's playing a double game, but it's frustrating that the rhetoric we constantly have to listen to is about our great ally Turkey when when like in reality they're doing all kinds of supporting these groups behind the scenes, and now recently pretty blatantly just saying that we don't even think Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's like, well, then what are they? Like, do you think legitimate governments
I
just like
I
torture
can
and
tell
murder
you what Hamas
civilians?
is. They're the one thing worse than ISIS, because even ISIS didn't behead babies.
Yeah, so like how do you look at what Hamas does and then say they're not a terrorist organization, yet that's what Turkey is doing? And yeah, I hope we can figure out, I hope that there's some way to kick nations out of NATO, and so the world can figure that out, because Turkey should not be in NATO. They're just wreaking havoc with a lot of things, and they should not be a NATO ally, in my opinion.
I agree. Anyway, Kristy, we got like a minute left, so I gotta let you go. But first, where can people follow you?
Well, I'm on Twitter now, formerly Twitter, now X, and my handle is at Kristy Perano.
All right. I gotta end it here, but Kristy, thank you so much. Looking forward to having you back next time.
Thanks for having me.